So good evening, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. It's not Shabbat. It's Wednesday night. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you. It's Wednesday night. I have the microphone, and it's on. We're testing a new system here. Good. Welcome. It's good to see you all. Welcome to Wednesday night. College of Jewish Studies, Valley Beth Shalom. We're delighted you're here. College of Jewish Studies offers university-level learning without the sororities, quizzes, or football teams. This year we're doing the debates that have shaped Judaism, and tonight we're going to take a sort of hop and a skip and a jump because we've spent 2 sessions now talking about issues of the medieval Jewish world. We talked about Maimonides and Halevi and the mystics, and now we're going to move from the medieval Jewish world into the early modern Jewish world, and I'll introduce Rabbi Sessler in just a moment. So this week, wonderful guest, and you'll meet him in a moment. Next week, we're going to jump 2 feet into modernity, and we're going to take up the issue of early Zionism. And we're going to take up the great debate of the 2 great Zionist fathers, Theodor Herzl and Achad Ha'am. And our guest will be Rabbi Chaim Seidler-Feller, who is the Rabbi Emeritus of UCLA Hillel, and a wonderful, wonderful teacher of text. And everyone is invited to come back next Wednesday and to enjoy that. The following week, Rabbi Farkas and I will be here once again, and we're going to take up the questions of America, the character of American Judaism, and the 2 great philosophers of American Judaism, Abraham Joshua Heschel and Mordechai Kaplan. And then in our final session of the month, the final session of the series, we'll look at the whole series of debates and what they've taught us, and as a sort of, you should excuse the expression, dessert, we'll talk about one of the great controversies of Jewish life, Hamantash versus Latkes. And that will be our controversy of the month.
You should be ashamed of yourself. You took the baker's reward, and now you're going to go.
Thank you.
You're going to go.
You don't know what I'm going to defend.
Now you're going to go for Latkes.
No, how do you know I'm going to defend Latkes? I might defend Hamantash. Let him defend Latkes.
Thank you so much. $5,000.
Don't take it personally. Don't take it so personally. All right. A couple of other announcements, things that are going on in the shul. We have a wonderful program here at VBS called Dinner for Docs, doctors, physicians. And it's been going on for 10 years. It's a group of physicians who gather for Torah study and dinner. As an anniversary present, they're having a 10-year anniversary tomorrow night. And they have a guest speaker, and everyone's invited to come to the speaker, which is a little bit like 7:30 in the evening. And the speaker is 8 o'clock in the evening. He's the head of the Anxiety Center at Harvard University's Medical School. It's a study of anxiety and how we get past it. And you're all invited to come in. If you're anxious, come. Okay? If you're a little nervous about coming, that's even better. Friday night is Shabbat. And Shabbat, this week is a very important Shabbat. It's Shabbat Shira. Here's the flyer. Shabbat Shira, the Shabbos of Song. And every year on Shabbat Shira, we do a special service and program dedicated to some aspect of Jewish music. Now, not only is it Shabbat Shira, but it's also the Shabbat of Valentine's Day, which, of course, is a holy day in the Ashkenazi calendar. So we're going to do an evening of Jewish love music, love songs, okay? From the Bible through modernity, a history of Jewish music on love. A lot of wonderful music. So please come Friday night, 7:30. Should be a lovely, lovely, sweet evening of prayer and music and learning about the Jewish idea of love. And then, of course, Shabbos morning is always Torah study, and we're delighted to have you. One other quick announcement, a moment of selfless self-promotion. Billy, where's the book?
Right here.
My new book just came out. Here it is. It's called In Pursuit of Godliness. It's the life and times of Rabbi Harold Schulweis. You may recognize the picture, okay? And you may recognize the gentleman. On March 5th, Thursday evening, March 5th, which is right after our series, we're going to have an evening celebrating the book, and our guest will be Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson. And I'm the one to ask the questions, and the guest answers. This week, Rabbi Artson will ask the questions, and I'll answer. So we'll preview the book, and we can get you a good deal on the book. Thank you. Well, we were close. So I think it's a book you might enjoy. And those of you who were part of the shul in the old days will really reminisce. And those of you who'd like to know who is this man you've heard so much about, what were his thoughts and his positions, and how did he understand Jewish life? It's a great book. It'll be a movie soon. And Brad Pitt is playing me. George Clooney is playing Rabbi Schulweis. Susan Sarandon plays Malka Schulweis. Charlize Theron plays Nina. Get me going a while. I can go through. Billy, thanks. Someone had a question. Yes. It is on Kindle. It is on Kindle. I haven't done an Audible book yet. They haven't asked me to record it, but it is on Kindle. Okay?
Can we buy them here, though?
You can buy the book here. If you buy the book here, it might be cheaper than on Amazon. Okay? And you can write it as a donation. No, don't write as a donation. You'll go to jail. Tonight is Alice's birthday. We want to wish you a happy birthday from all of us. Yom Huledet Sameach. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Alice. Happy birthday to you. Louise, yes? In 2 days, it's Billy's birthday. Happy birthday, William. Happy birthday, Yom Huledet Sameach. Yom Huledet Sameach. Yom Huledet Sameach. Anyone else? Anniversaries? Anybody hit the NASDAQ? Yeah, I haven't even started the lecture yet, and you're already asking. Go ahead. We've got an inquiring congregation. Yes?
Can you mention Hazak on Monday?
Chazak is on Monday.
And we have a rabbi coming to speak
I
about.
hope he has something to say. We'll see. It's over the weekend, we'll see. Okay, good. We have lots of things to learn tonight. So let's begin as we always begin. I know these chairs are a little uncomfortable, and I apologize. It's just, it's easier to heat this room than the other room, and it's cozier. So could everybody stand up? Stand up. Turn to the folks beside you and say, damn good to see you. Thanks for coming.
I'm wondering if we should move the seats back a little bit
Yeah, we
because
will.
people are sitting on the side.
We will move the seats back. Pop, you good?
This would have been my 70th wedding anniversary.
I know that. The kids sent me that today. Don't sit down. Stand up. Stand up. Arms around each other. Get close. Shh. How was the lecture? Pretty good. But the best part was I stood next to the best smelling Jew in Tarzana. And we thank God for the chance to be together to learn Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Please be seated. Please be seated. Our guest tonight is Rabbi Tal Sessler. Rabbi Sessler serves as the senior rabbi of the Sephardic Temple on Wilshire Boulevard, which has got to be the nicest synagogue building in America, right? It is just a beautiful place. I know you built it brick by brick, so I want to thank you. Rabbi Sessler is coming off of a wonderful triumph. About a week ago, he welcomed the chief rabbi of England, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and sold the place out. So kol hakavod lecha. It was a wonderful evening for those who were able to come and to learn with him. Rabbi Sessler holds a doctorate in Jewish thought, a rabbinical ordination from the Jewish Theological Seminary. He was originally from, I think, Israel or someplace like that.
Nobody's perfect.
Yeah, no, but he speaks English better than me, so I'm jealous as hell. And he's an instructor at the Academy of Jewish Religion here in Los Angeles, as well as a wonderful colleague of Rabbi Farkas's and mine. We're delighted to have you. Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Please, you're up.
All right. I want to thank you, Rabbi Feinstein. It wasn't too long ago that I was a rabbinical student in training, and I was reading and learning texts with my fellow students authored by you. I think questions Jews ask, for example.
Talmud Brachot, I wrote
Yes.
that.
And so it's a great honor for me. Thank you for inviting me. And I was asked to speak about the Baal Shem Tov and the Vilna Gaon, or the Hasidim and the Mitznagdim. So I'd like to start by trying to neutralize a prevalent misconception. Do you know what's the worst translation ever? The sixth commandment is not thou shalt not kill. It's thou shalt not murder. Big difference. But I want to talk about two great cultural mistranslations of American Jewry. The first one is that a mitzvah is a good deed. Wrong. A mitzvah is a commandment. It's an obligation. It's not a good deed not to steal. It's an obligation not to steal. It's not a good deed to fast on Yom Kippur. It's a commandment. Now, here's another misconception which pertains to tonight. I should sit, even though I'm used to standing. Yeah, standing is good too. Okay. I'm still standing. Elton John, you know that one? Okay. So people see an ultra-Orthodox Jew with a beard and a black hat, and they say, he's a Chassid. Not necessarily. Some ultra-Orthodox Jews vehemently reject Hasidism, and they are known as, in some quarters, Misnagdim, or I should say as an Israeli, Mitnagdim, which means opposers, those who oppose the Hasidim. It's not a great identity to embrace, to be in opposition to something, right? But what we want to be aware of when we speak about Hasidism is that not all Orthodox forms of Judaism are Hasidism. Some are, and some are not. Once upon a time, there was a German Jewish genius. His name was originally Gerhard, and then he became Gershom Scholem. And he single-handedly facilitated the academic discipline of study of Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah. And he teaches us that really there are three reincarnations to the concept of Hasidim. What is Hasidism? Chasidut in Hebrew? Piety. Yirat Shamayim. Piety. The ancient Hasidim, tells us the Mishnah, were like the Lakers on Staples Center. Way before the game starts, they get up, they warm up, right? That's what the Lakers do. If you're a Clipper fan, please, now would be the time to... No, I'm just kidding. But it says the ancient Hasidim of old would come way before davening just to get into a meditative headspace to prepare themselves for the solemnity, profundity of prayer, soulfulness of prayer. And then we had the medieval Germanic Hasidim, Hasidei Ashkenaz. Ashkenaz historically only meant Germany, by the way. The German pietists who innovated a new mystical approach in Judaism in the aftermath of the Crusades, 1096 onwards. The Hasidism we talk about tonight and that we think about starts really in the 1700s. In the 18th century. Yeah, it is in the 1700s. Innovated by a man known historically as the Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good name. And this 1700s phenomena that continues to this day, the most famous Hasidic group today is Chabad, really starts as a response to a religious crisis. Judaism became, in many ways, the preoccupation of an intellectual elite. people who could really study Talmud inside out and practice Judaism, halacha, Jewish law, with exactitude and precision, and follow the Talmudic argument, which is dialectic. It's curvy, it's complicated, it's a back and forth. And most people feel alienated from the religious spiritual life. Comes the Baal Shem Tov, comes the Hasidic movement, and they revolutionize and reinvigorate and transform Judaism. Now I want to try and explain to you what's the difference between this new Hasidic approach and the non-Hasidic approach. The Hasidim have a poetic, mystical disposition. They're spiritual romantics, if you want. The Misnagdim, the Mitnagdim, they are logicians. They have a cerebral, structured approach to Jewish life. The best way I can explain the difference between the Hasidim and the non-Hasidim is take the word mitzvah. You ask a non-Hasidic observant Jew, what is a mitzvah? He will tell you what we said earlier. A mitzvah is a commandment. It's what German philosopher Immanuel Kant called a categorical imperative. It's a spiritual or ethical obligation. Ask a Hasid what a mitzvah is. He will tell you that the word mitzvah is connected to the Hebrew word tzavta, which means togetherness. That a mitzvah is a spiritual vehicle for soulful unity with God. For example, the mitzvah of prayer unites your consciousness with God. That the mitzvah of having a Friday night Shabbos meal unites you soulfully with those around the table with you, your family, your friends, your fellow community members, fellow Jews, fellow human beings. Very different approach, right? One sees a mitzvah as an obligation from on high, from God, that we have to adhere to and fulfill. The other one says the core of religious life is to facilitate unity of soul with God and amongst ourselves. That's one way to explain the difference. Religious life is an obligation. Religious life is a bridge for soulful unity with fellow human beings and with God. Another example says in Pirkei Avot, in the Mishnah, Ethics of the Fathers, Hevei Zahir b'mitzvah. Hevei Zahir is rabbinic Hebrew. Zahir would really mean on the face of it, be scrupulous, be prudent, be mindful in the fulfillment of a mitzvah. If it's Sukkot, I can say Sukkos, I'm at an Ashkenazi synagogue. If it's Sukkot, make sure that when you hold the etrog, that it actually has a pitom, right? Pitom v'ramses, right? Make sure that, otherwise, be scrupulous in a mitzvah. Do it the right way. Says the Hasidic approach, Zahir doesn't only mean scrupulous, methodic. Zahir also comes from the word Zoher, which means radiant. Be radiant in a mitzvah. Glow in soul. Be enlivened, revitalized by virtue of performing a mitzvah. Right? So the non-Hasidim do it the right way. The Hasidim enhance your soul and the souls of those around you. Right? Two very different approaches. What is new about Hasidism, and why did the opponents of Hasidism, the Mitnagdim, led by the Vilna Gaon, loathe and despise Hasidism? This was a Jewish civil war. The Vilna Gaon says we should do to the Hasidim what Elijah the prophet did to the prophets of the Baal. Slaughter them. The first Chabad Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneor Zalman of Liani, was imprisoned because the Mitznagdim, the opposers of Hasidism, told the Russian authorities that the Hasidim are inventing a new religion. For them it was no longer Judaism, and they're supporting the enemies of the Tsar, Napoleon, which wasn't true. And the Hasidim were very disciplined. One of their great values is unconditional love of one's fellow Jew, Ahavat Yisrael. They didn't return the compliment. They were focused on disseminating Hasidism. And in a sense, they won that battle. When did that war stop, by the way, between the Hasidim and Mitnagdim? Secularization, emancipation. Both the Hasidim and the Mitnagdim had bigger fish to fry. But really, it wasn't pretty for a long time. What it really incurred the wrath of the non-Hasidim, especially the Vilna Gaon. So, we said one thing. Let me try and say it again. For the non-Hasidim, for the opposers of Hasidism, the most important value is Torah study, Talmud Torah, so that we can know Jewish law inside out, so that we can fulfill the law. Our obligation to God is to fulfill the mitzvot. So, studying Torah in order to fulfill the mitzvot. For the Hasidim, mystics, for them, the key word, the name of the game is not defense, like in the NBA, defense is the name of the game. The name of the game in Judaism for the Hasidim is dveikut, which literally means in Hebrew, glueness. You should super glue the core of your being to God. You should seed the consciousness of self and let your heart leap and rupture into unity with God, especially through prayer. Right? Imagine, I would take this cup of water and drive down to Santa Monica and pour it into the ocean. This water would be part of the great oceanic mass of being, right? No longer a distinct, discernible entity. That's what we want to do. We want to completely unite in soul with God. That's the Hasidic goal of Jewish life. Not study Torah to perform the mitzvot in precision, that too. But ultimately, it's the experience, the spiritual, religious experience of uniting in soul with God. Dveikut, oftentimes translated to English as cleaving to God. Another thing, which the Mitznagdim really didn't like, suddenly you have a Rebbe. You have like a regal, mystical sage that people come to him for yichidus, which is like spiritual therapy. And they tell him everything that bothers them in life. And there is what Max Weber called one of the founding fathers of the modern science of sociology, charismatic leadership. The opposers of Hasidism are taken aback by that. We're supposed to have a direct line to God, right? We're all supposed to have God's cell phone. You don't need a rabbi to connect you to God. There's a fear of a personality cult, especially after this guy, Shabtai Tzvi, in 1666, declared himself a false messiah, and virtually the entire Jewish world almost fell for it. But then he had to convert to Islam or die, and that could ruin your whole day, and everybody understood. The late Rabbi Gordon used to say, that could ruin your whole day. God rest his soul. So another thing that the opposer of Hasidim didn't like is the focus on the Rebbe, right? On the singular Hasidic leader. Another thing that the Vilna Gaon and those who opposed Hasidism didn't like is that in Hasidism, we emphasize, I'll use a philosophical term and then we'll explain it, God's imminence. What does that mean, imminence? God's this worldly presence. For the Misnagdim, God is really an otherworldly force. God is that which is beyond us, beyond time, beyond history, beyond human understanding. The Hasidim emphasize koach hachayut, the power of vitality, the Shekhinah, the godly presence in this world. Remember when we repeat the Amidah, we say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. What does that mean? Holy, holy, holy. Distinct, distinct, distinct. Sacred choreography, we say beyond us, beyond us, beyond us. God is beyond us, right? But then, by the way, it's from Isaiah. And then we say, Meloch kol haaretz kvodo. The entire earth, the entire world bespeaks emanates God's all-pervasive presence. Every flower, every leaf of grass dancing in the wind, everything bespeaks God's presence. The non-Hasidim didn't like the fact that the Hasidim emphasized God's presence in this world so much. Right? In Parshat Vayetchanan, which is the second Torah portion of the last book of the Torah, Dvarim, Deuteronomy, it says, En od milvado. There are none but God. Literally, it means, on the pshat, the immediate contextual level, there are no other gods but Hashem, the Jewish God of the universe, right? But what the Hasidim took it to mean, there is nothing but God emanating, filling the whole world. And that, for the Hasidim and for the non-Hasidim, undid the traditional separation between God and the world. Okay? So that's another reason why the opposers of Hasidism saw Hasidism as really a deviation from traditional Judaism. They also did other things, like changing davening prayer times. You know, for example, Chabad is a Hasidic group. They start praying at what time on Shabbat? Many? 10. They're you know, the traditional opponents of Hasidism say there's a Zman Tfilah. You have to finish saying the Shema, but whatever time. That's more technical in nature. Until when do you want me to go, Rabbi? Until you're done. Okay. So I'll be done. By 11:30, we're out of here, I promise. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just in a good mood. I know, just about 20 to 30, whatever. Yeah, not too long. Here's something hopeful. Hasidish. Definitely Hasidish time. Yeah.
When the Spirit strikes you.
Yeah. You got it. By the way, a joke about a Yeke, a Germanic non-Hasidic Jew. There's a night in December where instead of saying Morid Hatal, God brings down the dew, which is my name in Hebrew, Tal. We say the one who makes the dew descend. We say Veten Talo Matar, and bring down dew and pouring rain. So it's an extra word. So what does the non-Hasidic Germanic, super punctual Jew tell his or her spouse before they go pray the evening service, the way they change from Morid Hatal 2 words to 10 Talo Matal 3 words? Says, honey, tonight I'm going to be a little bit late. Okay, he's saying one extra word. All right. Now, thank you, I owe you one. Now, in many ways, Hasidism is very popular, and the Kabbalah Center, some people might say controversial, whatever. For some people, maybe, some people not. We're not getting into it. Why are Kabbalah and Hasidism, Jewish mysticism, so popular? Because they talk about me. They talk about my individual spiritual experience. Hasidism really, in many ways, understands Torah as the journey of the individual soul in this world. If I wanted to be complicated, I would say that the same guy who pioneered Jewish mysticism as an academic study, Gershon Sholem, said that Hasidism is the psychologization of Lurianic Kabbalism. But then, since that is a kind of a weird, bombastic thing to say, let's just say Hasidism understands Torah as the psychological journey of the individual self in life. Take, for example, the second Torah portion, Parshat Noach, right? It's about Rabbi Farkas, right? Parshat Noach. Some people look at that Torah portion and say, okay, so maybe there was this tsunami in the ancient Near East. Who cares? What's it got to do with me in 57 AD, 2020? Come the Hasidic masters and say, you have to understand, we're all being flooded by the world. Emotionally, financially, mentally, politically, we're flooded by the world. You have to enter a cocoon of mindfulness. The ark represents the sanity and sanctity of Shabbat, of prayer, right? And later on, God said, so you got to enter the cocoon, the ark of Shabbat or prayer to buffer the world from drowning in the stormy seas of life. the material and psychological demands that life places upon us. Later on, God says to Noach, "Tzeh min hateva," get out of the ark. Don't just be into your own growth. Empower other people, right? According to Hasidism, the third Torah portion, God says to Abram and Sarah, go to yourself, right, from your country, from your homeland, from your parental household to the land that I will show you. Hasidic reading says Torah in Aramaic means oraita, which means instruction. This is not quasi-historical reportage or epic narrative, nice ancient story. The Torah is talking to you, to me. You want to get going in life? You want to make progress as a family member, as a human being in general? You need to move beyond your socialization, between the way you were raised by mom and dad and the constraints of the geographical unit you grew up with and the language and culture. You got to go beyond that. You can say, I'm not comfortable, that's fine, but then we're not going to make much headway. So the entire Torah is read as a call to self, to grow in soul. I could give many examples. I'll just give one more. Jacob and Esau, twins, brothers. According to Rashi, Rashi lived in northern France mostly in the 11th century, between 1040 to 1105. In rabbinical school, we had a joke. I thought it was a good one. We said Rashi lived from 1040 to 1105. He wrote a lot for somebody who only lived for 25 minutes. But, just checking everybody's still awake. So, Rashi says that Jacob and Esau are not only two brothers, they also represent later on two ancient political paradigms, the pagan Roman Empire and ancient Israel. A titanic clash between two civilizations. But come the Hasidic masters, especially the foundational book of Hasidic psychology and the quote-unquote Bible of Chabad, the book of Tanya, it says that Jacob and Esau represents inner warfare, a civil war that's raging within each and every one of us. Esau represents the animal soul, the physiological self, the instinctual, impulsive self, what Sigmund Shlomo Freud later on called the id. Esau comes from, similar to the Hebrew word asui, which means ready-made. A healthy infant doesn't need to learn how to use the diaper, how to cry when he or she are hungry. A healthy, physiologically healthy person in adolescence doesn't have to learn physical desire. Esau comes first. The animal physiological self, or the vital soul, the physical soul comes out first. Jacob represents the refined self, the godly soul. That's why he's holding Esau's heel. The goal of the godly, civilized, refined soul is to rein in the impulses and the physiological instincts of the animal soul. And according to the Hasidic masters, that's the biggest battle in your life and my life, is the battle to achieve self-mastery of the spiritual over the physiological. Okay? So that's another example of a Hasidic reading. I'll give you one more. Why not? Yeah, this one. We're now reading about the Exodus, right? As Rabbi Feinstein said, Shabbat Shirah, crossing the sea. We just got out of Egypt this last Shabbat. Egypt, the Exodus from Egypt, in Hasidic philosophy and thought, is psychological. It's not so much a geopolitical exodus from country A, where we were subjugated, dehumanized, underwent a genocide of sorts, since Pharaoh decreed the murder of all Jewish male infants. The exodus from Egypt is an exodus from constrained consciousness. What the Kabbalists before the Hasidim called smallness of mind, katnut mochin. I wake up in the morning and I think about my credit card bills and I think about my mortgage and I need to get a haircut and I need to pick up my kids from school. I think about the small nitty-gritty of life and I lose myself. Moving from Egypt, from constricted consciousness, smallness of life, smallness of mind, into greatness of mind, into Eretz Gdola Urchava, a great and expansive land. Not a territorial land, but an inner landscape of cosmic consciousness, of greatness of mind, of cultivating the awareness in prayer and Torah study that we are all interconnected in an infinite universe inhabited by an infinite spirit that we call God. So the Exodus is the Exodus from the nitty-gritty of everyday life into being conscious of God's presence in the world. Right? Okay. I hope everybody fastened their seatbelts. I'm going to say one more thing about the building blocks of Hasidism. We just ended with sunset, the 10th of Shvat. The 10th of Shvat, exactly 70 years ago, the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, was an unbelievable human being. But I don't have time to tell the story of how he came to America, which is an incredible story. There was a movie made about it. So he died, he passed away the day that just finished 70 years ago. And a year after that, the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, became the 7th and final Rabbi of Chabad. And he gave his first Hasidic discourse exactly 69 years and now one day. And you know what he called that discourse? He built from the 6th Rebbe. It's called Bati Legani. 2 words from the Song of Songs means I arrived in my garden. I, being God, arrived in the garden being the world. Now what's up with that? A man, he and his wife could never have children. He was a Holocaust refugee. His brother was murdered by the Nazis. His grandmother was murdered by the Nazis. Much of his extended family was murdered by the Nazis. His father was exiled by Stalin and died in exile. He's saying the world is a garden. He's saying the world is really God's garden. Hasidism has what really has key themes of what people today called positive psychology. There's a book I just started reading that, if I may, I would recommend to everyone. It's called Positivity Bias. And it's about how the Hasidic outlook on life is about choosing to look at life from a positive perspective. And the book starts, it's a British Jew from Manchester, I think, authored this book, says, we have a tendency to look at the problems in our lives. For example, I'm wearing a white shirt. I want to look nice for you guys. I was told I'm going to be on video. But imagine I would have a stain here right now from the coffee. I would probably focus on the stain. That's a human tendency. But Hasidism is about training the mind to look at things positively. There's a quote, just because Chabad is the most well-known Hasidic group, that the Rebbe said at a moment of great vulnerability and spiritual and emotional exposure, he said, I trained myself to look at life positively so that I would not sink into despair. It says in the Talmud, in Tractate Eruvin, Yerida letzorech aliyah. When we go down in life, ultimately the purpose is to harness whatever happened to us so that we can ultimately grow. That is, I think, something that really is an important part of Hasidism, this great approach to life. And, if you think about that world was decimated in the Holocaust. And there was really no Hasidism in America before 1945, 1946. That world resurrected itself. In Israel, in America, around the world, it's an unbelievable thing, right? And I don't know about you, but it makes me also feel very emotional. Now, I said prayers, so I want to give you an example. There's a story. There are all these stories. They're not necessarily empirically factual, but they're illustrative. That the Baal Shem Tov once came to a Misnagdish synagogue, a Germanic synagogue. I can say that because my paternal grandfather was from Berlin, so I can get away with it. So he went into the Germanic synagogue, maybe Fifth Avenue Synagogue in New York. And he said to the people, wow, there's so many prayers here. So they said, thank you. They thought he was a comic. He's like, no, you don't understand. The prayers are stuck here. They're not going up. And then another story goes, somebody came to the Baal Shem Tov's shul. Was it Valley Bet Shalom? I don't know. And they saw somebody praying frantically with all these kind of flamboyant gestures. And somebody looked at that guy and started laughing. Guy looked like he's not altogether with it, he or she. So the Baal Shem Tov told him, let me ask you a question. If you would see that same person making those frantic hand movements in the river, would you also laugh? This person is praying that way not to drown in life. Now, there was a great non-Hasidic American rabbi, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein of blessed memory from Brooklyn. And I was told by people who knew him that when he prayed the Amidah, he stood like a ruler. He wouldn't move, except when it came to the second to last benediction, the 18th one, when we say, Modim anachnu lach, we thank you. He would go down, and then he would go up again. See the difference between spontaneity in prayer and discipline in prayer. Rabbi Soloveitchik, who came from a very Misnagdish background, but was also taught some Hasidic philosophy in his youth, writes in his master work, Halachic Man, that after Rosh Hashanah services, when he was a kid, he picked up the book of Psalms, Tehillim, and wanted to pray, to read some Psalms. His father said to him, give me that, son. Put it back on the shelf and gave him Tractate Rosh Hashanah, the Talmudic volume pertaining to the laws of Rosh Hashanah. Says, you want to be devotional? You study God's law. You understand the difference? The Lubavitcher Rebbe would go practically every weekday to his predecessor, his father-in-law's resting place, and he would read and pray Tehillim for hours, praying on behalf of people. The Misnagdim say, you want to worship God? Study God's law, the Talmud, rather than pour out your heart with psalms. Okay? If I had a little bit more time, I would have talked to you about... Okay. So, there were two great representatives of the Hasidic and non-Hasidic approach to Jewish life in the second half of the 20th century in America. Rabbi Abram Joshua Heschel and Rabbi Soloveitchik. And Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote a book called Halachic Man to really explain the non-Hasidic approach to Jewish life. And he basically said there are three categories: the mystic, the rationalist scientist, and the halachic personality. And he basically explains that the halachic personality is somebody who used scientific methodology, analytic tools, in order to connect with God. And Heschel wrote his famous book about Shabbat. So Heschel reportedly said, Isha halacha lo haya velo nivra. There's no such thing as somebody who only lives by Jewish law. It's what Weber called an ideal type. It's a utopian figure. Rabbi Soloveitchik read Heschel's work, The Sabbath, and said it's all very nice and poetic, but Shabbos is lametet melachot. Observing Shabbat is about refraining from the 39 main categories of desisting from work on Shabbat. But it's a little technical, so I'm kind of...
Come back to this. So
Yeah.
Hasidism
Mhm.
is a form of spiritual romanticism,
Mhm.
mystic experience, sort of resonates with American spiritual life at this moment, right? I mean, because there's something kind of really attractive about that kind of thing.
It's
We use
individualism.
the word spirituality now as a very positive thing, and that's what it's individual, it's internal. You've done a beautiful job explaining it. Take a moment and come back to either the Vilna Gaon or to Misnagdisha spirituality in general, and describe that. What's attractive about Misnagdisha?
You're asking the wrong guy.
I know,
I'm very neo-Hasidic.
I know.
Um,
But talk for a moment about the Vilna Gaon and what that kind, or the Soloveitcher.
Okay, so
What makes that a spiritual model that has, what's its value as a spiritual model?
I think, first of all, it's very important to know and to remember that the Misnagdim, those who oppose Hasidism, are into Kabbalah. Some people think the Vilna Gaon was very much into Kabbalah. He was very proficient in Kabbalah. But Kabbalah is really a whole series of spiritual concepts and symbols that map out, kind of like physics has mathematical formulas to explain how the physical universe operates. Kabbalah uses spiritual concepts to purport to understand how the spiritual realm works. So they were all into Kabbalah. I think their fear of Hasidism came because they felt that feelings are not as important as values, ideas, and principles. And placing primacy in religious life over the religious feeling is a lower manifestation of devotion to God than discipline and values, right? Feelings can also lead us astray. It's not for nothing that in the third paragraph of the Shema we say, and don't sway after your hearts, lo tatu achelevchem, right? Feelings can be a double-edged sword, right? Sometimes we have negative feelings, or we have feelings that we want to do things that later on we'll really regret. So that's one thing. Another thing, as I said, if you start saying that God is everywhere, then you get to very dangerous territory. You're undermining the dichotomy between the sacred and the profane, between the pure and the impure. If God is everywhere, does that mean everyone is holy and everything is holy? That's tricky, right? So that, I think, is another reason. And the third one is the cult of the leader. You know, I'm going to be very open with you. You know, I'm a fan of Chabad. I'm a fan of Chabad theology, Chabad philosophy. Nobody in his right mind could contest that Chabad is more successful in spiritual impact on the Jewish world, who people who grew up with no Jewish literacy. There is no group that is bringing more results out there. But, you know, let's say there's a young Hasidic couple, could be from any Hasidic group, that they have in their stroller for the infant a picture of the rabbi who heads that Hasidic group. You have to ask yourself, they were worried about personality cults, right? And as I said, it came after a time in which there was somebody who was very charismatic, who declared himself Mashiach, right? Redeemer of the Jewish people and the world, turned out to be a false Messiah. And we know, even as late as the 1990s, there were people who said, let's say the Lubavitcher Rebbe is the Mashiach, right? And there are people to this day who say he's the Mashiach, he's not even dead, he's coming back. So there was a concern about the cult of the human flesh and blood mortal leader. There was a concern about the boundaries of the distance, the gulf between God and the world. And there was a concern about privileging feeling over values and thoughts.
It's not just a small thing. There's a billboard on the road up to Jerusalem If you get off the plane at the airport, now there's a train, but in the old days you'd take a cab or a bus. And as you're driving up to Jerusalem, just before the last curve, there's a giant billboard, yellow billboard, with a picture of the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the Hebrew says, Baruch haba Melech Mashiach, welcome King Messiah, right? Because the idea was that he's the Messiah, and he's going to come back, and the first place he's going to go is Jerusalem, and that's the road. I mean, he's not going to get on the number 1 bus, because he'll never get there, but that's the road he's going to take, and they want to be the, I mean, there was this notion of the worship of the leader, of ascribing godly qualities, not moral godly qualities, but godly powers to the leader, goes on. I mean, there's a sort of worshipful attitude toward the leader, even to this day. If you go to any Chabad house, every room has a picture of the Rebbe. Every room, right? It's an interesting fact. So that goes on. That goes on. And then the other thing is as well as this notion of the question of what's more important, performance of the form of the mitzvah or the inner feeling that one has for the mitzvah. They'd say that in religious life you ought to have a balance between the two, right? But what happens is that the Hasidim perceived that Jewish life had gone way to the side of formalism, the obsession with the details of Jewish law, and had forgotten the heart. And so they corrected it with a huge emphasis on heart, and the Misnagdim came back and said, you've gone way too far, because you've forgotten, because once you get so far into your inner feelings, you can begin to adjust the law to fit your own feelings, and that's what they were most afraid of. One of the things they were most afraid of.
Right. To be fair to my own statement about Chabad, there are some groups, the radical groups, who still claim the divinity of the last Rebbe and things, and others are much more pragmatic and realistic. I want to share with you another vignette from Rabbi Soloveitchik's work, Halachic Man, about his non-Hasidic upbringing. And he says he remembers in his father's shul, they were sounding the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and one Hasid, from the emotional and spiritual intensity, started sobbing, right? Because the shofar is what we call in psychology a primordial scream. Shofar is trying to articulate something about human emotions and human distress and human imperfections and human longings that words cannot capture. So he burst out sobbing. And he says, Rabbi Sessler says, his father looked at him and said, let me ask you a question, Mr. Hasid. Are you also going to cry in a few days' time when you shake a lulav? So it's a mitzvah to sound the shofar. It's also a mitzvah, right? But on the other hand, for the non-Hasidim, it's what's happening in the world around you, you can turn into a spiritual experience. So Rabbi Soloveitchik writes, for example, for the a Jewish person sees, oh, it's already dark out. It's time to pray Mariv. It's time for the evening service. So he has a beautiful, another beautiful anecdote from his childhood in this book, Halachic Man. He says, right before Ne'ilah, right, the concluding prayer of Yom Kippur, his father pointed to the window of the synagogue and told the little kid, Joseph Soloveitchik, Rabbi Soloveitchik, to be, behold, my son, this is the sunset of atonement and forgiveness, right? So there is a certain romantic streak there too. I want to share with you just two more very cool and deep things, I think, about the Hasidic philosophy. And that has to do with clothes, right? So, garments. Garments.
Clothing.
But not physical clothes, spiritual clothes. Hasidism teaches that the soul also has garments, just like the body has garments. Only that the garments of the soul are much more important than the garments of the body. Right? When I exercised this morning on the treadmill, I was wearing sweatpants. Now I'm wearing a suit. for the lecture. In between, I had a different shirt, whatever. So we change our garments. They're not so important. They're external to us. But in Hasidic thought, the garments of the soul are actually pivotal. They're central to who we are. And what are the three garments of the soul? I'll say it in Hebrew first. Machshava, dibur, ve'asiyah. Thought, speech, and action. And together, machshava, dibur, ve'asiyah, it's an acronym. Mem, daled, ayin, mada. Science. The science of being breaks down to what I think, and then what I say, and then the final act. Right? We think something, then we communicate it, and then it comes into actuality. Whatever it may be, right? From the most trivial thing. You tell someone, you think, I want to have dinner at that restaurant tomorrow with that relative. And then you call that relative, and finally, the two of you are actually... So, the idea of the garments of the soul. And secondly, God is also into fashion. God also has garments. What are God's garments? In Hebrew, malbushim, in Rabbinic Hebrew. The material world. God dresses up in matter. And I'll give you an example. It's an incredible way to think that the Hasidic thought came up with. Say you're walking down Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. You might be like Robert De Niro in, what is it, Taxi Cab? What's the
Taxi driver, yeah.
Taxi driver, right? Hey, I'm walking here, right? And you think to yourself, wow, 6 centuries ago, you didn't have those skyscrapers here, and there was only one ethnicity here, Native Americans, right? And then you think to yourself, well, forget about that. Millions of years ago, there was just ocean here. And then you say to yourself, well, forget about that. Millions of years before that, in the Jurassic era, there were just dinosaurs here. And then you say to yourself, forget about that. Before the dinosaurs, there was nothing. Nothing. And one day there will be nothing again. That's why Adon Olam, the concluding liturgical poem on Shabbat, we say Adon Olam, one of God's favorite nicknames, right? Master of the universe. Asher malach beterem kol yitzir nivra. God reigned, was spiritually sovereign before anything came into being, anything material. Ve'acharei kichlot hakol levado im lochno. And when all of matter is no more, only the pure spirit will permeate everything. So God has garments too, and that's the physical world. And the Hasid is the person who can train their mind and their inner eye to see beyond the veil of matter how the Spirit of God pervades everything. So I just wanted to share these two, for me, mind-blowing Hasidic notes.
So we have the 18th century comes, the 1700s. Europe is beginning to move from medieval ways of thinking into modern ways of thinking. Science is beginning to gain momentum. Political philosophies of democracy are beginning to gain momentum. And the world is moving into its early modernity. And at the same time, the Jewish world, which is separated from the Christian world in Europe, divides into these two philosophies. You have the revolution of Hasidism, which comes along and says to every Jew, you don't have to be a scholar. You don't have to be a yeshiva bucher, a yeshiva scholar.
Democratization.
It's a democratization. Every one of us has a soul which is connected to God. In fact, the thing that the Hasidim actually taught was that when you feel like God is far away, that's not a metaphysical problem. It's not because God is really far away. That's your own hang-up. And we're going to teach you a way to push that aside and to realize that in all ways and in all things, God is close to you. And that's where you get this notion of song and dance and Hasidism. And it's all based on this idea of the introjection, pushing inward of Jewish life. There's a famous Hasidic story that Heschel used to like to tell. He says, a Litvak, which is a Misnagid, an anti-Hasidic Jew, is talking to a Hasidic Jew. And the anti-Hasidic Jew says, the problem with you Hasidim is you have no respect for the details of the law. You pray at any time you want, but there's a time for the morning prayers and a time for the evening prayers, and you miss it. And the Chassid says, my brother, you're absolutely right. I have to confess. Let me tell you what happens. I wake up in the morning, ready to daven on time, and I take my talis and my tefillin and my siddur to the window, and I open the window, and I'm about to begin my prayers, and you know what happens? The morning floods into the room. And I see children on their way to school and grown-ups on their way to work, and I see the sun beginning to rise in the east, and I smell the morning, and I hear the birds, and I'm so taken with the wonder of the morning, I forget to say my prayers until it's too late. So comes the evening time, I'm going to say my prayers on time. I take my prayer book to the window, I open the window, and the song of the night enters the room. It's so quiet, it's peaceful, families gathered around their hearths, the warmth of family life, the quiet of the evening, the sound of a few animals out in the wilderness, and I feel the peace of the nighttime, and I'm so taken with it, by the time it comes to pray, it's too late. So the Chassid says to Litvak, to the Misnagid, tomorrow I have a solution, I'll close the window. And because it's a Hasidic story, the Litvak says, God forbid. Now, you see what goes on in that story? How feeling overcomes the formal details of the law. That's classic Hasidism. Now, go the other way. What's classic Misnagid? Classic Litvak thinking, right? Think about a ballet dancer. Right? Think about a ballerina or a ballet master. Think about the attention to detail. How every gesture, every step has to be carefully rehearsed and carefully performed, because every gesture counts. Now you could say, why are you so hung up? Just dance any way you want. You could say that. That's the Hasidic attitude, right? But the Misnag attitude is, if I really revere God, every gesture must be perfect. Because that's the way you show somebody that you really love them. Right? Every gesture must be perfect. Every law must be observed to the letter. Every regulation has to be carried out to the nth detail. Nothing can be left out. And just as the ballet dancer exquisitely performs every movement, the Misnagid exquisitely performs the laws of tradition, and it becomes part of them. And that's their reverence for God. Now those two attitudes, you see how those two attitudes contrast? And that was part of the great contrast. That was part of the great contrast that made these two movements so very, very powerful. Now, how that comes down to us today, where that went, how it comes down to us today, and what difference it makes, right? And how do you create a religious life that respects both sides of that dialectic? Well, for that, we're going to need some coffee and brownies. So let's take 5 minutes. Everybody go outside, get a snack, use the restroom, and come back in 5 minutes, and we're going to have a conversation with Rabbi Sessler. Thanks so much.
We'll be back right after this, so don't go away.
Yeah, that'd be nice. No.
Oh, I have, thank you.
Is it just geography?
Well,
Which way did they lean? You lean.
the Sephardim, we wouldn't have the Kabbalah as we know it, is a distinctly Sephardic endeavor. The descendants of those who were exiled from Spain innovated the Tzfat Kabbalah and Lechadodi, Yedid Nefesh. Let's revisit it after the brownies. We'll talk more.
I just figured
Yeah.
the third one.
Sure. Thank you.
Is closer to Sephardic than it is to Ashkenazi.
It's a hybrid. Yeah, it's a hybrid. Hello.
These are kosher, so I have either dairy.
Oh, thank you. They're kosher, but they're also full of calories. So I'm going to resist. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, though. Thank you very much. So, what?
Where did you find you in both worlds? You're doing a little of this and a little of that.
Yeah.
Kind of unified
All right.
I just met another old friend of yours.
Yeah?
I did an unveiling ceremony for Betty Helfand.
Oh, yeah?
He told me that your brother Joel was in the carpool with them in Hebrew school, and they also lived on Dale. Help, you know this man?
Yeah. Helfand.
I didn't know who they were. The guy called.
Mark Helfand.
Mark and Alan and Spencer.
Yeah.
He's not well.
Yeah. Shalom, shalom.
But Spencer called
Ken.
and said he could listen. I don't know what I
I have. Thank you.
need an unveiling.
I'm just going to make a quick note. I'll be right with you.
They're all there.
Yeah.
They're very nice people.
Yeah. I haven't seen him in years.
Yeah, I
years
know.
and years.
And we just started talking, and one of them said, I was in Hebrew school, and our carpool was this kid and Joel Kabbalah. And I was like, I know Joel Kabbalah. I know his brother Billy. We grew up together before they got rich, you know. So this is
Yeah, Rabbi Jeff. I got the Kindle version
Ken.
of this. I'm going to give you
Ken.
this. I'm going to give
Ken,
you
בבקשה. אהה.
תמונה של הרבי,
כן.
בעשרת הדיברות.
Everything okay? I missed you on Shabbos, but I was in Columbus, Ohio.
לא בהכרח, לא בהכרח.
Yeah. And then this Shabbos, I'm going to San Francisco.
לא בהכרח. צלם זה משהו שמשתחווים לו. אם זה לא למטרות פולחן, זה בסדר.
Straying
מותר לנו להציב תמונות. יש ויש. לא צריך לעשות הכללות. יש חסידי חב"ד שכן, ויש חסידי חב"ד שלא. אלה שכן, אז אנחנו לא מסכימים איתם. כל אחד יש לו את החסרונות שלו.
זאת אומרת שכל אחד מפענח דברים בצורה שהוא רואה את זה.
זה טבעה של האנושות.
You Jews. Yeah, right.
נכון, נכון.
So didn't that de facto throw them all in the same pot?
Yeah, but they didn't really end up
כן.
in the same pot when they got to Israel and realized that they had more politically,
Yeah.
not religiously separated.
כן,
All
כן.
joined each other's parties in Israel.
But when you say Litva,
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
they Hasidic Litvaks and not?
Hello.
Sort of
תודה, תודה.
Really was a Lithuanian Hasidic movement.
היי.
and the Germans, the Yekis, were the
They were all
Spirit, that you change the truth.
literally.
So I see
Right, that explains a lot.
Yeah, I'm familiar, yeah. I'm familiar.